respect to count 1 of indictment 302476, which charges vehicular homicide of I apologize, Your Honor.
I understand, sir.
Demonian Brown, we the jury find the defendant, Johnthony K. Walker, guilty of criminal negligent homicide.
Members of the jury, in regard to count 1 of this indictment, your foreperson has announced a finding of guilt on criminally negligent homicide. If this is the verdict of each and every member of the jury, would you signify by raising your right hand? The record reflects all 12 jurors. Would you read count 2, please?
Yes, Your Honor. With respect to count 2 of the indictment 302476, which charges vehicular homicide of Ziana Harris, we the jury find the defendant, Johnthony K. Walker, guilty of criminally negligent homicide.
Members of the jury, your foreperson has announced a finding of guilt of criminally negligent homicide in regard to count 2. If this is the verdict of each and every member of the jury, would you signify by raising your right hand, please? The record reflects all 12 jurors have raised their right hand. In regard to count 3, sir.
With respect to count 3 of indictment 302476, which charges vehicular homicide of Cordasia Jones, we the jury find the defendant, Johnthony K. Walker, guilty of criminally negligent homicide.
In regard to count 3, your foreperson has announced a finding of guilt of criminally negligent homicide. If this is the verdict of each and every member of the jury, would you signify by raising your right hand, please? The record reflects all 12 jurors have raised their right hands. In regard to count 4, please.
With respect to count 4 of indictment 302476, which charges vehicular homicide of Zaria Mantee, we the jury find the defendant, Johnthony K. Walker, guilty of criminally negligent homicide.
The foreperson has announced the finding of guilt concerning count 4 of criminally negligent homicide. This is the verdict of each and every member of the jury, which is signified by raising your right hand. The record reflects all 12 jurors have raised their right hand. In regard to count 5, please.
With respect to count 5 of indictment 302476, which charges vehicular homicide of Zoe Nash, we the jury find the defendant, Johnthony K. Walker, guilty of criminally negligent homicide.
In regard to count 5, your foreperson has announced a finding of guilt of criminal negligent homicide. In regard to count 5, if this is the verdict of each and every member of the jury, would you signify by raising your right hand, please? The record reflects all 12 jurors have raised their right hand. And then in regard to count 6.
With respect to count 6 of indictment 302476, which charges vehicular homicide of Keontae Wilson, the jury find the defendant, Johnthony K. Walker, guilty of criminally negligent homicide.
Members of the jury, the foreperson has announced a finding of guilt of criminally negligent homicide in regard to count 6. This is the verdict of each and every member of the jury. Would you signify by raising your right hand, please? The record reflects all 12 jurors have raised their right hand. In regard to count 7, sir.
With respect to count 7 of indictment 302476, which charges reckless aggravated assault of Nairi Yana Fortson, we the jury find the defendant, Johnthony K. Walker, guilty of reckless aggravated assault.
In regard to count 7, your foreperson has announced a finding of guilt of, in regard to that count, reckless aggravated assault. If this is the verdict of each and every member of the jury, would you signify by raising your right hand? The record reflects all 12 jurors have raised their right hand. In regard to count 8, please.
With respect to count 8 of indictment 302476, which charges reckless aggravated assault of Kareem McGuire, we the jury find the defendant, Johnthony K. Walker, guilty of reckless aggravated assault.
Foreperson has announced a finding of guilt, reckless aggravated assault in count 8. This is the verdict of each and every member of the jury, signified by raising your right hand. All 12 jurors have raised their right hand in regard to count 8. In regard to count 9, sir.
With respect to count 9 of indictment 302476, which charges reckless aggravated assault of Zachariah Nash, we the jury find the defendant, Johnthony K. Walker, guilty of reckless aggravated assault.
In regard to count 9, the foreperson has announced a finding of guilt of reckless aggravated assault. This is the verdict of each and every member of the jury. Would you signify by raising your right hand, please? All 12, let the record reflect all 12 jurors have raised their right hand. In regard to count 10.
With respect to count 10 of indictment 302476, which charges reckless aggravated assault of Isaiah Stevenson. We, the jury, find the defendant, Johnthony K. Walker, guilty of reckless aggravated assault.
Four persons announced the finding of guilt of reckless aggravated assault in regard to count 10. This is the verdict of each and every member of the jury, signified by raising your right hand, please. Record reflect all 12 jurors have raised their right hand. In regard to count 11.
With respect to count 11 of indictment 302-476, which charges reckless aggravated assault of Nassim Matee, we, the jury, finding the defendant, Johnthony K. Walker, guilty of reckless aggravated assault.
The foreperson has announced the finding of guilt of count 11, reckless aggravated assault. This is the verdict of each and every member of the jury. Signify by raising your right hand, please. All 12 jurors have raised their right hand. Let the record reflect. In regard to count 12.
With respect to count 12 of indictment 302-476, which charges reckless aggravated assault of Zachariah A. Brown, we, the jury, find the defendant, Johnthony K. Walker, guilty of assault.
Of assault.
Yes, Your Honor.
Your foreperson has announced the finding of guilt of assault in regard to count 12 of this indictment. If this is the finding of each and every member of the jury, would you signify by raising your right hand, please? Record reflect all 12 jurors have raised their right hand. In regard to count 13.
With respect to count 13 of indictment 302-476, which charges reckless aggravated assault of April Davis, we, the jury, find the defendant, Johnthony K. Walker, guilty of reckless aggravated assault.
The foreperson has announced the finding of guilt of reckless aggravated assault in regard to count 13. If this is the verdict of each and every member of the jury, would you signify by raising your right hand, please? Record reflect that all 12 jurors have raised their right hand. In regard to count 14, please.
With respect to count 14 of indictment 302-476, which charges reckless aggravated assault of Alona Stevenson, we, the jury, find the defendant, Johnthony K. Walker, guilty of reckless aggravated assault.
The foreperson has announced the finding of guilt, reckless aggravated assault in regard to count 14. If this is the verdict of each and every member of the jury, signify by raising your right hand, please. Record reflect all 12 jurors have raised their right hand. In regard to count 15, please.
With respect to count 15 of indictment 302-476, which charges reckless aggravated assault of Nescora Fletcher, we, the jury, find the defendant, Johnthony K. Walker, guilty of reckless aggravated assault.
In regard to count 15, your foreperson has announced the finding of guilt of reckless aggravated assault. This is the verdict of each and every member of the jury, signify by raising your right hand, please. Record reflect all 12 jurors have raised their right hand. In regard to count 16.
With respect to count 16 of indictment 302-476, which charges reckless aggravated assault of Giselle Champion, we, the jury, find the defendant, Johnthony K. Walker, guilty of assault.
Your foreperson has announced the finding of guilt of assault in regard to count 16. If this is the verdict of each and every member of the jury, signify by raising your right hand, please. Record reflect all 12 jurors have raised their right hand. In regard to count 17.
With respect to count 17 of indictment 302-476, which charges reckless aggravated assault of Cortez Poole, we, the jury, find the defendant, Johnthony K. Walker, guilty of assault.
In regard to count 17, your foreperson has announced the finding of guilt of assault. This is the verdict of each and every member of the jury, signify by raising your right hand, please. The record reflect all 12 jurors have raised their right hand. In regard to count 18.
With respect to count 18 of indictment 302-476, which charges reckless aggravated assault of Montana Devante Stepp, we, the jury, find the defendant, Johnthony K. Walker, guilty of reckless aggravated assault.
Foreperson has announced the finding of guilt in regard to count 18 of reckless aggravated assault. If this is the verdict of each and every member of the jury, signify by raising your right hand. Record reflect all 12 jurors have raised their right hand. In regard to count 19, sir.
With respect to count 19 of indictment 302-476, which charges reckless aggravated assault of Janasia Williams, we, the jury, find the defendant, Johnthony K. Walker, guilty of assault.
In regard to count 19, your foreperson has announced the finding of guilt of assault. If this is the verdict of each and every member of the jury, signify by raising your right hand, please. Record reflect all 12 jurors have raised their right hand. In regard to count 20.
With respect to count 20 of indictment 302-476, which charges reckless aggravated assault of Arcobi Cofield, we, the jury, find the defendant, Johnthony K. Walker, guilty of assault.
In regard to count 20, your foreperson has announced the finding of guilt for assault in regard to that count 20. If this is the verdict of each and every member of the jury, signify by raising your right hand, please. Record reflect all 12 jurors. In regard to have raised their right hands. In regard to count 21, please.
With respect to count 21 of indictment 302-476, which charges reckless aggravated assault of Darian Griffith, we the jury find the defendant, Johnthony K. Walker, guilty of assault.
In regard to count 21 of this indictment, your foreperson announces a finding of guilt of assault. If this is the verdict of each and every member of the jury, signify by raising your right hand. The record reflect all 12 jurors that raise their right hand. In regard to count 22, sir.
With respect to count 22 of indictment 302-476, which charges reckless aggravated assault of Samuel Hale, we the jury find the defendant, Johnthony K. Walker, guilty of reckless aggravated assault.
Members of the jury, your foreperson has announced a finding of guilt of reckless aggravated assault in count 22. If this is the verdict of each and every member of the jury, would you signify by raising your right hand, please? The record reflect all 12 jurors that raise their right hand. In regard to count 23, please.
With respect to count 23 of indictment 302-476, which charges reckless aggravated assault of Jamar Bowling, we the jury find the defendant, Johnthony K. Walker, guilty of reckless aggravated assault.
Members of the jury, your foreperson has announced a finding of guilt of aggravated assault in regard to count 23. If this is the verdict of each and every member of the jury, would you signify by raising your right hand, please? The record reflect all 12 jurors that raise their right hand, please. In regard to count 24.
With respect to count 24 of indictment 302-476, which charges assault of Corey Fowler, we the jury find the defendant, Johnthony K. Walker, guilty of assault.
Foreperson has announced the finding of guilt of assault in regard to count 24. If this is the verdict of each and every member of the jury, would you signify by raising your right hand, please? The record reflect all 12 jurors that raise their right hand. In regard to count 25.
With respect to count 25 of indictment 302-476, which charges assault of Brian Johnson, we the jury find the defendant, Johnthony K. Walker, not guilty.
Members of the jury, your foreperson has announced a finding of not guilty in regard to count 25. If this is the verdict of each and every member of the jury, would you signify by raising your right hand, please? Let the record reflect all 12 jurors that raised their right hand. Count 26.
With respect to count 26 of indictment 302-476, which charges assault of Zamara Gould, we the jury find the defendant, Johnthony K. Walker, not guilty.
In regard to count 26, your foreperson has announced a finding of not guilty. This is the verdict of each and every member of the jury. Signify by raising your right hand, please. Record reflect all 12 jurors that raise their right hand. In regard to count 27.
With respect to count 27 of indictment 302-476, which charges assault of Bruce Shirley, we the jury find the defendant, Johnthony K. Walker, not guilty.
In regard to count 27, your foreperson has announced a finding of not guilty. If this is the verdict of each and every member of the jury, signify by raising your right hand, please. Record reflect all 12 jurors that raise their right hand. Count 28, please.
With respect to count 28 of indictment 302-476, which charges assault of Alexa Rodriguez, we the jury find the defendant, Johnthony K. Walker, not guilty.
In regard to count 28, there's been an announcement by the foreperson that you find not guilty in regard to count 28. If this is the verdict of each and every member of the jury, signify by raising your right hand, please. Record reflect all 12 jurors that raise their right hand. In regard to count 29.
With respect to count 29 of indictment 302-476, which charges assault of Jose Rodriguez, we the jury find the defendant, Johnthony K. Walker, not guilty.
In regard to count 29, your foreperson has announced a finding of not guilty. This is the verdict of each and every member of the jury. Signify by raising your right hand, please. Let the record reflect all 12 jurors that raise their right hand. In regard to count 30.
With respect to count 30 of indictment 302-476, which charges assault of Tremaine Watson, we the jury find the defendant, Johnthony K. Walker, not guilty.
In regard to count 30, your foreperson has announced a finding of not guilty. If this is the verdict of each and every member of the jury, signify by raising your right hand, please. Record reflect all 12 jurors that raise their right hand. In regard to count 31, please.
With respect to count 31 of indictment 302-476, which charges reckless endangerment, we the jury find the defendant, Johnthony K. Walker, guilty of reckless endangerment.
Your foreperson has announced a finding of guilt of reckless endangerment in regard to count 31. If this is the verdict of each and every member of the jury, signify by raising your right hand, please. Record reflected all 12 jurors that raised their right hand. In regard to count 32.
With respect of count 32 of indictment 302-476, which charges reckless driving, we the jury find the defendant, Johnthony K. Walker, guilty of reckless driving.
Your foreperson has announced a finding of guilt of reckless driving in regard to count 32. If this is the verdict of each and every member of the jury, signify by raising your right hand. record reflect all 12 jurors that raised the right hand. Finally, in regard to count 33.
With respect to count 33 of indictment 302476, which charges use of a portable electronic device by a school bus driver, we, the jury, find the defendant, Johnthony K. Walker, guilty of use of portable electronic device by school bus driver.
Members of the jury, your foreperson has announced a finding of guilt in regard to count 33. If this is the verdict of each and every member of the jury, would you indicate by raising your right hand? Let the record reflect all 12 jurors that raised the right hand. This foreperson, thank you, sir. You may have a seat. Sir. Johnthony K. Walker, would you please stand, please? Johnthony K. Walker, it's the verdict of the jury in regard to count 1 that you're guilty of criminal negligent homicide. In regard to count 2, you're guilty of criminal negligent homicide. In regard to count 3, you are guilty of criminal negligent homicide. In regard to count 4, you are guilty of criminal negligent homicide. In regard to count 5, you are guilty of criminal negligent homicide. In regard to count 6, you are guilty of criminal negligent homicide. In regard to count 7, verdict of the jury that you're guilty of reckless aggravated assault. In regard to count 8, you're guilty of reckless aggravated assault. In regard to count 9, you're guilty of reckless aggravated assault. In regard to count 10, you're guilty of reckless aggravated assault. In regard to count 11, you're guilty of reckless aggravated assault. In regard to count 12, you are guilty of assault. In regard to count 13, you are guilty of reckless aggravated assault. In regard to count 14, you are guilty of reckless aggravated assault. In regard to count 15, you are guilty of reckless aggravated assault. In regard to count 16, you are guilty of assault. In regard to count 17, you are guilty of assault. In regard to count 18, you are guilty of reckless aggravated assault. In regard to count 19, you are guilty of assault. In regard to count 20, you are guilty of assault. In regard to count 21, you are guilty of assault. In regard to count 22, you are guilty of reckless aggravated assault. In regard to count 23, you're guilty of reckless aggravated assault. In regard to count 24, you are guilty of assault. In regard to count 25, you are not guilty. In regard to 26, you are not guilty. In regard to 27, you are not guilty. In regard to 28, you are not guilty. In regard to count 29, you are not guilty. In regard to count 30, you are not guilty. In regard to count 31, it's the verdict of the jury that you're guilty of reckless endangerment. In regard to count 32, it's the verdict of the jury that you're guilty of reckless driving. In regard to count 33, you are guilty of use of a portable electronic device by a school bus driver. We'll talk about dates and so forth, so you may have a seat now, sir. Members of the jury, I thank you when you were selected, and I thank you again. You have worked extremely hard. I think everybody in this courtroom, the state, the defense, and everyone that's been here at this trial understands the difficulty of the task that you were facing. And you've worked extremely hard, and I think everyone in this courtroom will thank you for that. Let me tell you a little bit about, we'll talk to you in just a second about going home, what you desire to do at this late hour. People may want to talk to you about what your thoughts are. You are free to talk to them if you so desire. You're also free not to talk to them if you so desire. Folks, I asked you to go the extra mile back last week, and you have gone the extra mile. So thank you. I'll have you go back with the officers in the jury assembly room. If you'll wait there a second, we'll talk to you a second about going home.
All rise.
Have a seat.
May be seated.
This time, Mr. Walker, I'm going to order a pre-sentence investigative report concerning the findings of the jury and verdicts of the jury, and we'll set a sentencing hearing 45 days off, and let's talk about a convenient date. And so everybody knows, a pre-sentence investigative report will be ordered, that will be prepared, we will have a hearing, and we're going to set a hearing date right now. And at that point in time, certainly the defense may want to put on proof, the state may want to put on additional proof. So we're at March 1, 31 days in March, so sometimes around the Well, the 14th would be 45 days. The 13th, you want to set this done, Mr. Kingston, this carry on the 12th, or would you like to go the following week?
I'm actually scheduled to be in trial both weeks in federal court.
Both weeks? Now, the law says within 45 days, but if you all want to set it a little bit longer than that, I think the pre-sentence investigative report will be fairly lengthy. So if there's no objection to setting it after the 45 days, do you have any objection to doing that?
No, I don't, Your Honor. And if for some reason that case moves, I'm happy to go back.
Well, if you will get with the state then, but they will need to notify everybody here. Everybody has the right to be there. But now, I indicated that was April the 14th was the 45th day. That's a Saturday. You're going to be in trial the following week, the week of the 23rd.
No, Your Honor.
Okay?
Yeah, the week of the 23rd is fine.
And folks, when we do things, let's see, 24th, 25th, 24th of April.
Yes, sir.
Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
All right, folks, Ms. Dunn, Mr. Kingston, Ms. Garrett, we'll set this for April the 24th, and we'll set it at 9 o'clock in the morning. And at that point in time, that will be the sentencing hearing. At that time, we ought to have the pre-sentence investigative report. We'll get this to this done. Any statements concerning that?
None at this time.
I'm folks, and Mr. Walker was going to, I'm going to have the same line.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Under the same guidelines, folks, so everybody knows. The same guidelines, but the sentencing hearing will be that day. We'll be adjourned in the morning at 9 o'clock.
Court's adjourned at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning.